As my tastes change and I get a chance to watch more and more movies, largely due to wonderful companies like Severin, Vinegar Syndrome, and Synapse putting out forgotten or lost movies, I take a second look or deeper look at certain films. This also changes what I'm willing to call a black sheep. The Howling series is, well, kind of a black sheep series in horror in general. It has 8 films over a 30-year span from 1981 to 2011, and while the first one is typically held in high esteem because of its pedigree and, well, because it's good, there's a lot to watch and unpack here. You can look at which movie is the black sheep of the series, but let's get even more granular with it. Let's look at which of the 2 Howling movies directed by Philippe Mora deserves the moniker. While the third one has that specific Ozploitation fare that is admittedly I am an easy mark for, The Howling II, Your Sister is a Werewolf has a pizzazz to it that is unmatched in mid-1980s cinema that 40 years later is a great black sheep candidate. The rights to the Howling series were kind of up in the air, and so Joe Dante was out. The writer of the Howling novels, Gary Brandner, wasn't a huge fan of the first movie or the director after Dante said that the novels were just okay and his movie improved upon the source material. This movie is a mess, and that starts with the production, as the first movie made a good amount of money, but Avco Embassy was accused by producer Stephen Lane of adding costs that may or may not have been real, and he was upset that he wasn't making any money that he thought he should have off the production. He bought out his co-producer and wanted to strike while the iron was hot, but wasn't able to make a direct sequel due to other rights issues. Lane then entered into a tenuous agreement with a production company called Hemdale Film Corporation. These guys grossly misrepresented how much money they had, and the production, as well as the script, changed multiple times. While author Brandner is credited as a screenwriter in the film, his initial script was completely changed and has almost nothing to do with either the first film or the second book in the series. This might have been rectified even with all the changes, but the author had to leave due to pressures of turning in the third book in the Howling series. Or he hated the production. Could be both. Now, it is a hot mess, but that doesn't mean the movie's bad. Oh, okay, the movie's kind of bad, but it has charm out the wazoo and is a fun kind of bad. Even with its faults, it has a few genuinely strong things going for it. The movie opens at the funeral of Karen, who is played by Dee Wallace in the first movie. We get Red Brown as Karen's brother Ben, and he ends up meeting an associate of Karen's named Jenny, and Stefan, who is not related to anyone or anything. Red Brown is a damn legend, and you could make a drinking game out of this or any other movie of his where you imbibe on something every time he screams when he does anything. Here, it's when he shoots werewolves or tackles someone. Reb is a bad movie royalty actor, with his appearances as Captain America in 2 separate films in 1979, You're the Hunter from the Future, Strike Commando, and Robo-War. But then he throws us a curveball by showing up in good stuff like Uncommon Valor and Hardcore. Dude's a mystery. Jenny is played by Annie McEnroe, who I don't recognize from much, but I did realize she is the realtor lady in Beetlejuice, and also shows up in The Survivors with Robin Williams. The strange man named Stefan is none other than genre legend Christopher Lee. Even in bad movies, he is a consummate professional and a fun watch. To name the movies that Lee is in would be an exercise in futility, and everyone has their favorites, so I'll just tie in some stories of Lee's time here. He was so disappointed with the other actors acting in this movie that he would often disassociate between takes. Director Mora also had no idea that Lee was a secret SS-killing badass, and when Lee got off the plane in Czechoslovakia, he was treated to a hero's welcome. At some point, he also took Mora on a mini tour explaining his exploits that caused the director to make a documentary about Lee in his military days. Lee also contributed to helping with issues on the production when he was able to help, in character, explain away bad special effects. Finally, when Joe Dante, who was a huge fan, cast the imposing former vampire and Bond villain in Gremlins 2, Lee apologized for his involvement in The Howling II. Stefan explains that Ben's sister, as the movie suggests, was a werewolf, although that explanation also extends to Stefan and the main villain Streba being siblings when she is actually the queen of the werewolves. He shows Ben and Jenny the tape of the broadcast where Karen changed into a lichen and was killed, but he needs her to be put to her final rest. One of the stupidly fun aspects of this movie is that the original script was geared towards vampires, and while they moved it over to a different old school monster, they didn't change a lot of the surrounding parts, including Transylvania and how you're supposed to dispatch the threats. Stefan meets the other two at Karen's grave and tries to kill her again, but is interrupted by a group who follow Striba. Striba's character involvement had the movie receive a couple different names they toyed around with too, including Howling II, Striba, Werewolf Bitch, which sounds like something they would make up for a fake preview in Grindhouse, but you would have also an amazing title there. The trio go off to hunt Striba, who is creating an army of super sexy werewolves and clearly must be stopped. The music is also shockingly appropriate and decent here. The score itself by Stephen Parsons works in nearly every scene, and then you have the punk club. The scene works on so many levels, but just seeing cool 1980s Christopher Lee in his shades is worth the price of admission, and yes, he does pull it off. The club and music from the band Babel comes back in a very hilarious but problematic end credits sequence. You see, Striba is played by Sybil Danning, who was a B-movie queen and quite often nude, both in the pages of Playboy and on screen. For this movie, she'd grown tired of being naked so often and got the producers to agree to only one nude scene where you can see anything. She's in strange leather or covered in wolf fur for the rest of it. The scene is clear as day and has the nudity that she agreed to, but when the producers called Maura when they were working on the end credits, they asked if he thought it was okay to run the scene of her topless again, and he said it was probably fine. What he, and certainly Sybil, didn't know was that they were going to run the clip 17 times during the course of the credits. Yeesh.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
Sybil is known for more than just this though, as she can be seen in other fun genre work like Malibu Express, The Tomb, and the TV miniseries V. She was also in the first two Oliver Reed Musketeer films that, well, also had Christopher Lee, and newer horror directors like Rob Zombie would put her in projects like the 2007 remake of Halloween. While I would agree with Lee that the acting isn't great here, it's part of the charm, with Danning and Brown particularly looking like they are having a damn blast. The trio meet a bunch of local villagers who are part of the group that have sworn to oppose Striba because she has killed parts of their families for generations. Ben finds the castle that Striba is at, but also loses a partner named Vasily, while Jenny is also captured. Striba is able to reanimate Vasily and use him to attempt to kill Stefan before Reb absolutely destroys him by tackling him out a window and onto a spiked gate. Another thing to discuss that actually works really well besides the score are the effects, and those shouldn't have been as good as they are. Okay, good's a strong word, but they are fun as heck and some of the more entertaining looking kills of the 80s. The special effects were severely hampered by budget, and many of those cool kills were added after principal filming had ended. The gore is more than sufficient, and it's really funny in a good way to watch the hastily put together dummies get absolutely wrecked by bat creatures or magic that makes their eyes pop out of their sockets. The werewolves were a big part of what made the first movie so cool, with their transformations to the way they walked and even stood. Here though, oh boy, they did what they could. They were sent a box from 20th Century Fox that was labeled Planet of the Apes, and that's exactly what they received. You'll see a lot of the wolves clothed or only partially visible or just naked with the focus on the human nudity. They did what they could with what they had, and Lee added a line about werewolves devolving from humans, which adds a little credence to the apes thing. The heroes end up at the castle and grounds with a handful of them dying, but ultimately killing Striba. How it happens is irrelevant, as there is a section with Reb Brown screaming as he kills more werewolves than Rambo kills soldiers, and teams up with Christopher Lee in a tag team that I did not have on my bingo card. Striba is able to kill Sybil, but also sacrifices himself in a very unconvincing fire, but that's what happens, I guess, when it's the Howling II and your sister's a werewolf. Jenny and Ben go back home, now kind of a couple, and we get a bizarre ending that happens when you don't know how to end a movie. I say that, but it's also the only part of the original script from screenwriter Robert Sarno, who originally wanted his movie to be a comedy. Sarno only has this and one other movie to his name. The entire Howling series deserves a once-over, even if it's the first one that's the only one people are willing to talk about. There just aren't enough werewolf movies out there, and we still aren't getting great ones, as evidenced by the recently released The Wolfman from Lee Winnell and Blumhouse. While the rest of the series doesn't deserve its day in the sun like this one, I'd highly recommend buying the new 4K from Vinegar Syndrome that shows this hot mess in the best quality possible. The Howling II is enjoyable trash of the highest quality.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.